It started like any other quiet day in my small town. The kind of morning where the sun rises slowly over the hills, birds chirp gently, and nothing seems urgent. I was in my backyard, sipping on my coffee, and enjoying the view of my garden. But as I looked toward the old wooden shed at the edge of my property, I had no idea that soon, that very shed would be at the center of chaos. A piece of land no bigger than a small room, but it would drag me into something I never imagined: arguments, legal threats, and even national TV. The shed had been there long before I bought the house. The neighbors used to say it was built by the original owner decades ago, a man who was handy with tools and didn't believe in wasting space. It was sturdy, built with thick planks and rusted nails, and over time, it had turned into my own little storage place. I kept gardening tools there, old paint cans, and a few things from my childhood, nothing valuable, but memories attached. To everything, that shed meant something to me. One Tuesday morning, I saw a white truck parked across the street. Two men stepped out, both wearing fluorescent vests, clipboards in hand. At first, I thought they were utility workers, but they stood right at the fence line, pointing toward my shed and taking notes. I walked over to them casually, greeted them with a smile, and asked if they needed help. The taller one looked at me and said, "We're here to inspect this structure. It may be in violation." I blinked. Violation of what? He explained that according to county records, the boundary line between my property and the neighboring vacant lot was under review. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint. They claimed my shed was built partially on public land, and that it needed to be inspected and possibly removed. I laughed a little, not out of disrespect, but because it sounded ridiculous. That shed had been standing for decades. My house had a clear title. I'd never heard a single word about this in all the years I'd lived there, but they weren't joking. The shorter man handed me a notice. It said I had 15 days to prove ownership or the structure would be subject to municipal removal. That notice changed everything. I contacted the county office immediately. They passed me around from one department to another. Everyone kept repeating the same thing: someone submitted a formal complaint, and it triggered a review of the land parcel. They wouldn't tell me who filed it. I asked for survey maps, records, anything I could use to prove the shed was on my land. They promised to get back to me. Days passed. No answers. My neighbors started to talk. Some supported me, others kept quiet, especially one man who lived 2 houses down, Mr. Green. He had always eyed that vacant lot next to mine. Once, years ago, he told me that land used to belong to a friend of his, and he wished he'd bought it when he had the chance. I started to wonder if he had anything to do with the complaint, but I had no proof, only suspicion. The story took a strange turn when a local news van showed up. A reporter knocked on my door, microphone in hand, and asked if I was the shed guy. I had no idea how they even heard about it. Apparently, someone tipped them off that a resident was about to lose part of their property due to government overreach. It made a great local segment: small town homeowner fighting back against city authorities. They filmed the shed, interviewed me, and aired it on the evening news. That's when things really exploded. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends called from across the state saying they saw me on TV. A few even sent texts like "Stand your ground" and "Don't let them take your shed." Social media picked up the clip. People started debating online. Some said I was clearly in the right. Others blamed bureaucracy, and a few asked if I was just trying to stir attention. I didn't care much for fame. I just wanted peace. And I wanted my shed to stay where it was. But then came the letter, a formal letter from a law firm. It stated that their client, still unnamed, was asserting legal claim over a strip of land that supposedly included where the shed was built. The letter accused me of trespassing and damaging public property. They threatened a lawsuit if I didn't remove the structure within 7 days. Now, it wasn't just officials or inspectors, it was lawyers. I sat on my porch that night with the letter in my hand, staring at the shed under the moonlight. That old, faded structure never looked so vulnerable. I remembered the time I repainted the door, the afternoon I fixed the leaking roof with my nephew. I even recalled the sound it made when it rained, a soft echo like a drum. I couldn't let them take it, not without a fight. The next morning, I contacted a property attorney. I explained everything: how long the shed had been there, the inspection, the news report, and now the legal threat. She listened carefully and asked if I had a land survey. I didn't, not a recent one, anyway. She said the first step was getting a licensed surveyor to measure and confirm the exact boundary lines. That would cost money I hadn't planned to spend. Still, I agreed. The surveyor arrived 2 days later. He walked around with his equipment, drove stakes into the ground, took GPS readings, and compared maps. He was quiet and methodical. At the end of the day, he said something that gave me a little hope. "From what I see," he said, "you're probably in the clear. But we'll know for sure once I file the official report." Probably, that word stuck in my mind. I couldn't relax. The 7-day deadline was ticking. The lawyer's letter still sat on my kitchen table like a ticking clock. The only thing I could do was wait and prepare. I took pictures of the shed from every angle. I gathered old documents, even a photo from years ago where my dog was lying beside it, anything that showed it had been there before any of this mess began. On day 6, I got another visit, not from officials, not from the media, but from the man I least expected, Mr. Green. He came over, smiling, holding a small box of cookies. I invited him to sit. He talked about the weather, about gardening, about everything except the shed. And then, just as he got up to leave, he looked me in the eye and said, "You know, some people think that land was never yours to begin with." That's when I knew he was behind it, and the real fight was just beginning. Mr. Green's words echoed in my head long after he walked away. Some people think that land was never yours to begin with. He said it casually, almost like a passing thought. But I could feel the weight behind it. That wasn't just small town gossip, that was a message, a warning, maybe even a confession. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded politely, thanked him for the cookies, and closed the door. But inside, I was boiling. That man had been living a few houses down for years, always acting polite, always pretending to be helpful. And now it seemed like he had been plotting something this whole time. I knew I had to stay calm, let the survey results come in. That was my only chance to prove the shed was on my land. But the tension around me kept growing. More neighbors started asking questions. A few cars would slow down in front of my house, some people pointing, even taking pictures. A friend called to say she saw a TikTok clip about the shed man from Kentucky. I didn't know whether to laugh or be angry. What started as a private issue was now turning into a show for the whole country. 3 days later, the surveyor returned with his report. My heart was racing as he stepped out of his truck. He handed me the folder and said, "You're going to be fine. The shed is entirely within your property. The records are outdated, but the new survey confirms it." I could have cried. All that stress, fear, and pressure, it all lifted off my shoulders in one moment. I thanked him again and again. I called my attorney, sent her the report, and she responded within the hour. She said we had legal ground now, strong ground. The threat of removal had no basis. The lawsuit warning was empty. It should have ended there, but it didn't. The next day, a new twist appeared. A clip from the news was picked up by a national morning show. They replayed the story, calling it the Kentucky Shed War. Suddenly, my small shed had become a symbol. People online were debating property rights, government overreach, and even conspiracy theories about land grabs. I was being tagged in tweets, emails from strangers poured in. And one morning someone even left a sign on my fence that said, "Stand your ground." The attention felt surreal. This was just my backyard, just my old shed. I wasn't a public speaker, not an activist. I was just trying to keep what was mine. That same week, a letter arrived from the mayor's office. It was written in a neutral tone, but I could tell it was about damage control. It stated that there had been a procedural mistake, and the enforcement team acted before the proper records were reviewed. They apologized for any stress caused and confirmed no action would be taken against me. That should have been the final chapter, a quiet resolution. But when I read that letter, I felt something wasn't right. It wasn't just a mistake. Someone had started this. Someone had submitted that complaint. Someone wanted my shed gone. I decided I wouldn't let it go. I filed a public records request to see who had submitted the original complaint. It took time, but after some calls and a bit of pressure from my lawyer, I finally got the answer. The complaint was filed under a business name, Green Holdings, LLC. I didn't need a map to figure that out. Mr. Green had made it official. He had formed a small company under his name, most likely to buy property, and was trying to push me out of mine. I was furious. I walked straight over to his house, knocked on the door. He answered like nothing had happened, acting all surprised to see me. I didn't yell. I just held up the papers and said, "Next time you want to steal something, maybe don't sign your own name." He tried to deny it, said it was all legal, and he thought the land was up for development. I didn't care about his excuses. I told him I had everything I needed and I wouldn't be backing down. He didn't reply, just closed the door with a fake smile still on his face. After that, I went quiet on purpose. No interviews, no calls, no more social media. I focused on fixing up my shed. I repainted it, replaced the old hinges, and even added a small flag out front. It was no longer just a storage place. It was a reminder of how easily someone can try to take what's yours and how important it is to stand up. A few weeks later, something surprising happened. I got a call from a local school teacher. She said her class had followed the shed story and wanted to interview me about standing up for your rights. I said yes. When I visited, those kids had a dozen questions. They asked me about land ownership, about the law, about how it felt to be on TV. But one boy asked something I hadn't thought about. Would you have fought this hard if it was just a tree or a fence, not a shed? I paused. That answer was yes. Because it was never about the shed itself. It was about what it stood for. It could have been a mailbox, a rock, or a patch of grass. What mattered was that it was mine. And when people start giving up small things, piece by piece, they don't realize how much they're losing until it's too late. That interview with those kids turned out to be my last public talk. I went back to my normal life after that. The shed stood firm. Mr. Green never spoke to me again. The reporters eventually moved on to the next big story. But sometimes, I still get postcards from strangers, thanking me for standing up. Some send pictures of their own sheds, little signs that say don't back down, or just a thumbs up. It still feels strange. But in some way, I'm glad it happened. Not because of the stress, or the threats, or the spotlight, but because it reminded me that even the smallest things we own matter, and when we fight for them, we're really fighting for something much bigger. Months passed, and things slowly returned to normal, or at least, a new kind of normal. I wasn't the shed guy in the news anymore. People stopped driving by to take photos. The online buzz faded, and the media moved on to other stories. But the shed stayed, and so did the lesson. Thought I spent more time outside that spring than I had in years. Every morning, I'd walk out with my coffee, sit in front of the shed, and just enjoy the quiet. The same shed that had been nearly torn down was now stronger than ever. I had reinforced the walls, fixed the roof, and added a few solar lights. It looked like something out of a magazine. Now, my little symbol of resistance. Some weekends, I'd find little notes slipped into my mailbox from people in town. Notes that said things like, "Thanks for not giving in," or, "We were watching and rooting for you." Even people I didn't know. One elderly couple came by to say they had almost lost their garden to a city development plan, but after seeing my story, they decided to fight it, and they won. That's when I realized something strange. That shed didn't just protect my tools and boxers. Somehow, it had sparked something in people. It made them remember that their homes, their land, even the smallest corner of their backyard, they all matter. When someone tries to take it away, they have every right to say no. I'd never seen myself as the kind of person who stood up and made a statement. I lived a quiet life. I did my work, paid my taxes, and stayed out of trouble. But sometimes trouble finds you whether you like it or not, and when it does, you either give up or stand tall. I chose the second option. One afternoon, I was putting up some shelves inside the shed when a car pulled into my driveway. A man in a suit stepped out. He had a calm face, professional smile, introduced himself as a producer from a documentary company. He said they were putting together a series on ordinary people who made a difference in unexpected ways. I laughed and said, "You're talking about politicians or firefighters, not a guy with a shed." But he shook his head. "No," he said, "you stood your ground when no one else would. You didn't do it for fame, and you didn't back down when the system tried to push you out. That's the kind of story we want to tell." I didn't say yes right away. I thought about it. I'd already had enough of cameras and questions. But something inside me told me this was different. This wasn't just about going viral, it was about preserving the truth. About letting others know that even quiet people in small towns can push back when they're pushed too far. So, a few weeks later, a small crew came to town. They filmed the shed, walked through my property, interviewed a few neighbors, and even included some of the news footage. But what I liked most was how they showed the full story, not just the drama, but the waiting, the thinking, the fear, the frustration, all the quiet parts that usually don't make it into headlines. The documentary didn't make me rich or famous. It didn't change my life overnight, but it did something more important. It made people think. I started getting letters from folks across the country. Some had been through similar situations. Some just wrote to say thank you. And one letter stood out. It was from a woman in rural Idaho who wrote, "They tried to bulldoze my family barn for a highway expansion. After watching your story, I stood in front of it and refused to move. The project rerouted." That letter made me cry. I never set out to inspire anyone. I just wanted to keep what was mine. But sometimes, that's exactly how movements start, not with big speeches or banners, but with one person quietly refusing to give in. Eventually, the town cooled off. Mr. Green sold his property and moved away. No one really talked about him. After that, people had seen what he tried to do, and even if they didn't say it out loud, they remembered. Actions have consequences, even the sneaky ones. Life moved on. Seasons changed. My shed became a kind of landmark, though I never asked for that. A few kids once came by on their bikes and asked if this was the famous shed. I laughed and told them, it's just a building. But the fight for it, that's what made it special. Looking back, I learned that standing up for yourself isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's just staying firm. Saying no when you know you're right, and not letting anyone big or small walk over you because they think you won't push back. It reminded me that everyone has a shed in their life. Maybe not a real one, with wood and nails, but something they care about, something worth protecting. A family, a piece of land, a principle. And when someone tries to take it, you don't have to shout or throw punches. You just have to hold your ground. Stay calm, know your rights, and stand tall. That shed changed me. It made me stronger, not just on the outside but inside. It made Me realized that no matter how small you think you are, you're never powerless if you stay true to what matters. So now, when I walk outside each morning, I don't just see a shed. I see a story, a victory, a reminder that sometimes, the quietest people fight the hardest battles and win, and maybe, just maybe, someone else out there will hear this and remember, no matter who you are, or how small your fight may seem, it matters. You matter. And you're not alone.